a summary of A Defense of Poetry. Shelley's A Defense of Poetry, written in 1821 but not published until 1840, was a direct reply to The Four Ages of Poetry by Thomas Love Peacock, which was published in Ollier's Literary Miscellany in 1820. Nowhere is the collation between neoclassical detachment and romantic fervor more accurately represented than in these two essays. Peacock's is essentially comic, yet it conveys a penetrating critique of many fashionable romantic assumptions. The four ages are those of iron, gold, silver, and brass. The Iron Age is the age of primitive age where birds under pressure from royal warriors and in exchange of liquor itself an inspiration. The Golden Age is the age in which poetry becomes retrospective. Something like a civil poetry has been established. Individual heroism was given place to institutionalism. So, poets acclaim and early found whose courage was glory to the misty past can be celebrated as presented in his current successor. This is the age of Homer, the golden age of poetry. In Silver Age, there are two kinds of poetry: the imitative, which recasts the poetry of the age of gold as Virgil recast Homer, and the original, chiefly comic, didactic and satiric, in which there is fastidiousness of style and a choice harmony of expression that bores by its repetitiveness. It is only obvious moral truisms that lend themselves to poetic expression, and as the sciences of morals and of mind mature, they move beyond the reach of imaginative and emotional treatment. Since there is a limited scope for polished versification of good sense and elegant learning, poetry declines towards extinction. In conclusion comes the Brass Age. It rejects the polish and learning of the Age of Silver and regresses to the crude barbarism of Iron Age, which, pretending to return to nature and revive the Age of Gold. So far as modern literature is concerned, Peacock identifies the individual age of romance, chivalry, and knightly honor as the Age of Iron. The Golden Age was the Renaissance, when the rights of all ages and nations were compounded in such writers as Ariosto and Shakespeare. The Silver Age was the reign of authority, the age of Dryden and Pope, but soon the influence of Hume and Gibson, Rousseau and Voltaire brought every authority into question. The change had been rung on conventional patriotism. Even poets began to think it necessary to know something of what they talked about. Thomson and Cowper actually looked at trees and hills instead of just being content to write about them. The effect of this change was revolutionary. Poetical genres began to be reckoned in the finest of all things, and only poetical impressions could nourish it. Poetical impressions can be received only among natural senses, for all that is artificial is anti-poetical. Society is artificial, therefore we we live out of society. The mountains are natural, therefore we will be in the mountains. There we shall be shining models of purity and virtue, passing the whole day in the innocent and amiable occupation of going up and downhill, receiving poetical impressions and communicating them in immortal verse to admiring generations. Peacock's attack is wholesale yet good-natured. He ridicules the notion of a poetic return to nature in 19th century England. Historians and philosophers are making progress while poets are waving in the rubbish of departed ignorance. He writes, Mr. Scott digs up the crotches and cattle stealers of the ancient border. Lord Byron cruises for thieves and pirates on the shores of the Moira and among the Greek islands. Mr. Southey wades through ponderous volumes of travel and old chronicles, from which he selects all that is false, useless, and absurd. Mr. Wordsworth picks up village legends from old omen and sextons. Coleridge, Moore, and Campbell all come in for scathing ridicule. A poet is, in our time, is a semi-barbarian in a civilized community, obsessed with the barbaric and suspicious past. The true philosophic poise, which surveys the world coolly and justly, gathers and analyzes data, and thus defends new and useful thinking, is the direct opposite of the poetic mind. For the inspiration of poetry lies in the rant of unregulated passion, the winning of exaggerated feeling, and the cant of factitious sentiment. Poetic composition is simply a waste of time that might be given to useful work. Shelley wrote to Peacock, "Your antithesis against poetry itself excited me to a sacred rage." He contrasts the synthetic principle of imagination with the analytical principle of reason. Reason is the imagination as the instrument of the agent, as the body to the spirit, as the shadow to the substance. Poetry is the expression of the imagination, in the widest sense of word. Not only artistic creators but the founders of laws and civilization, as well as other inventors, are all poets. For the poet, participles in the eternal, the infinite, and the one, and he seeks to express the order and beauty he discerns. The poet, in the more restricted sense, uses language as his medium. A poem is the very image of life expressed in its eternal truth. It is creating actions according to the unchangeable forms of human nature, as existing in the mind of the creator. That distinguishes a poem from that dialogue of detached facts, which constitutes a story of particular facts, obscures and distorts what should be beautiful. Poetry makes what is distorted beautiful. Shelley's definition preclude the distinction between poets and prose writers as a vulgar error. Great philosophers and historians have been poets. Shelley's idealism is such that he speaks as though the poet is generally reduced to making do with inadequate contemporary morals and fashions as his material. Few poets have chosen to exhibit the beauty of their conceptions as it's naked truth and splendor. Indeed, the alloy of costume, habit, etc. is probably necessary to temper this planetary music for moral use. So, the mystic sense that T.S. Eliot puts in humankind cannot bear very much reality is appropriate by Shelley as an individual limitation on the poet. He seems obsessed by the sheer potency of poetry. Ethical science can provide us with schemes and models, but poetry acts as an divine manner, awakening and enlarging the mind, and lifting the veil from the hidden beauty of the world. Shelley's prose is nothing if not inspired and inspiring. The imagination is the great instrument of moral good, which strengthens man morally as exercise strengthens human physically. Shelley seems to be close to Wordsworth here, but he makes clear that direct moral instruction demands poetry and diminishes the poet. As Peacock made a comic survey of the history of poetry, Shelley now makes a serious one. He gives due praise to Greek poetry, but insists that King Lear is the most perfect specimen of the dramatic act existed in the world. Tracing the connection between great drama and the moral health of society, he notes that in our own age, the greatest degradation of the drama is the reign of Charles II, or Charles II, you can say, in which only Milton stood aloof from acclaiming the defeat of liberty and virtue. But the peculiar stamp of Shelley's theorizing about poetry emerges most clearly when, comparing the Romans with the Greeks, he argues that the true poetry of Rome lived in its institutions. The disinterested achievements which built the empire amounted to poetry. They are the episodes of that cyclic poem written by time upon the memories of men. Likewise, whatever evil there was in the darkness of the Dark Ages sprang from the extinction of the poetic principle. It seems that Shelley's concept of what constitutes poetry embraces everything that is good. Small wonder then that he rejects Peacock's challenge to poets to resign the civil crown to reasoners and marching mechanics, and the argument that denies poetry its usefulness. On the contrary, whatever strengthens and purifies the affection, enlarges the imagination, and adds spirit to sense, is useful. Those who serve society in seemingly more practical ways merely follow in the footsteps of poets. In fact, we have more moral, political, and historical knowledge than we can handle. It is for lack of the creative faculty and imaginative power that our civilization remains enslaved to materialism. It is precisely at such periods as the present that the cultivation of poetry is more desperately necessary. Shelley's rhetoric takes wings as he proclaims his gospel. Poetry is indeed something divine. It is at once the center of circumference of knowledge. It is that which comprehends all science, and that to which all science must be. Even so, the most glorious poetry is probably but a feeble shadow of the poet's original conception. Poetry is the record of the best of happiest moments of the happiest and best minds. It represents the interpenetration of a divine nature through our own. It immortalizes all that is best and most beautiful in the world. The poet, therefore, must be incontrovertibly incontrovertibly the wisest and the happiest and the best of men. Indeed, poets are the hierophants of an unapprehended inspiration. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world.